So once we have done this panel of the global context, first we need to identify what are the needs that are the source of our project, are the source of our program, and why are we sharing data. So to this, we need to identify two kind of users. The users that are going to be able to help you, what we call here the stakeholders. So we have written a small definition. So it's the people who are concerned by, that can be invested in or impacted by the collection or the processing or the distribution of the information. So for example, I was talking about energy related data. So you have energy companies, you have also the cities or the region representative that can be impacted by the distribution of such data. If you talk about community energy production in solar or wind turbines, you can also have the people of the communities and the neighborhoods. So it's important to identify those stakeholders, because they can be sometimes helping you by providing you data, by providing you information, more detailed information about the process and the data in themselves. Or they can also be sometimes against you, because they don't want the data to be published. They don't want it to be shown in some ways. They want it to be shown their ways. So it's important to identify those stakeholders beforehand. And of course, you also need to identify the end users. So it's anyone or people or organization that finds a use for the information produced and communicated. And of course, those people are not necessarily specialists in the subject. I was talking in the previous slides about transport, commuting, for example, and the people who are commuting are just people like you and me, just citizens taking the public transport or taking their car. So when you're going to present something to them, you cannot assume that they will be experts on mobility, even if they use mobility every day. So it should be a priority when you launch, when you start a program or a project, that to identify the stakeholders and the end users. It's what I wrote here. It's like starting a business. When you start a business, of course, you have to find the product, you have to define it, you have to create it, and to be sure that it works and that it's economically interesting, etc. But of course, you also have to identify your market and the business partners that you could have. So when we talk about identifying end users, you can have some criteria about that. For example, who are the people to whom regulations and political objectives apply in terms of, for example, of renewable production goals. It's applying to the city level, or maybe the regional level. So the people who will be concerned by sharing data on energy production will be the people that are responsible of planning, political planning, of maybe giving incentives, giving money to projects launchers. So it could be interesting to look at the people who are in this category. Of course, you can also create questionnaires and surveys and create meetings to meet the people and to talk with them. Either they would be experts that you can contact and that know the field very well, and that will be able to point you to some people who could be the end users, and that you could be who could give you some valuable information. It's also interesting when we are talking about energy, to identify who could be the instigators of projects. to know who could be the people that would need some data for the project. If I take my example back about solar production, for example, who could be the solar plants projects leaders? Will it be some companies? Will it be some citizens communities? So it's important to identify this. And of course, there could be some other existing projects that you could inspire from. So it's also interesting to look at like what exists now. And once you have your end users, you can also identify why they need the information. So is it because there are some like national and international objectives, for example, the planification about energy? Is it because they are involved in like national or local initiatives? We have, for example, like energy positive territories in France. So those are the people that like enrolled in a program where they need to plan the evolution of their territory so that it's like positive in energy production in a few decades. So of course they will need to know at what level of energy production compared to their consumption they are currently. So they will want some information about the production and the consumption of energy. So of course people who are in such initiatives will be end users of any energy related data that you could provide. You can also identify if they need information for planned projects, etc. And of course, for example, we took in our region, we have a lot of people who are just contacting us and asking for data, for specific data. So it's also sometimes you can have some people who are coming to you and asking for data. So of course, it's good to be aware of that and to be sure that you take that into account. But I doubt. I'm sure you are not ignoring them. So it helps to identify what are the current trends about data. Are they asking for like potential sectors? Are they asking for their consumption? Are they asking for the effectiveness of actions? So it depends, but of course it's very interesting to have the feedbacks from the end users. So I'm just going to give a quick example, two quick examples in our region about this link to end users and the way that it helped us identify the most important, the most relevant indicators. And you will see that it was quite a process to identify this. So just so you are aware of how it worked in our region, and I'm sure you could have some other situations like that that happened in your region, and that maybe happened and occurred differently. So in 10 years ago, there were some climate objectives that were introduced at the regional level, and that required the region to track the progress of the various territories sub-regional level. So the idea was to identify some indicators that could help the region track the progress of those territories, and especially those who like the sectors and the territories that were most at risk economically. So first we identify the contributors in the region that were going to help us create and select these indicators. The whole project took a year. So first we started with a very large seminar. So we just gathered everyone in the region. So we had like 15 organizations, local governments, associations, local associations, tourism agencies. We had some climatologists also from various weather meteorological stations. And those people, we just asked them to discuss on this topic of climate indicators that could help fulfill these objectives. So they identified a lot of problems and they discussed it in their sectors, and we followed some of impact chain of climate change to understand where are maybe the key points in the whole process. And once we had the results from this first working group, which was at a very large scale, we reduced the size of the working group and just took some people in from all these to precise for each issue which are the most relevant and the most like how to say that, the most the event, the impact that could be that could happen like most probably. And so we had kind of a priority scale for each actor about the various indicators. So, and we also took the opportunity to identify the availability of data regarding those indicators. So once we had the indicators, the availability of data, and maybe the priority, we tried to make a cross-theme discussion to be sure that some indicators that were discussed in one sector could be sometimes useful for another sector, and or on the contrary, sometimes some sectors have indicators which are very like too precise and too like strictly the indicators only concern their sector. So it's sometimes not useful to spend a lot of energy just for one precise sector and one precise need. So we like reduced once again the list of indicators that we wanted to include and that we wanted to share, and we used available data to produce like the most important indicators which had the greatest priority. Of course, at this moment, it's very important to make sure that you define the indicators that you are producing very well. For example, if I talk about average temperature change, I need to say which temperature I'm referring to. Is it like the ground temperature, the air temperature? Is it the temperature at one specific point? When I talk about average, is it average by season? Is it a year average, etc.? And I take when I talk about change, of course, I will need a reference. Is it about like, is it a full period reference? I'm talking, for example, like an average on 10 years or an average on 2 years, etc. So it's very important when we are talking about that to define your indicators. Otherwise, you could have some issues because people will talk about an average temperature which is different from yours. So you will not be able to communicate if you don't have the same definition. So yes, just a little warning about when you are creating indicators, to be sure to define them very well and precisely. And so finally, we created a fourth working group to validate the indicators that we created and to create some analysis reports for the various kind of territories. So mountainous, agriculture, vineyards on the coast, but it was not for our case. And so we had some like reports based on the indicators that we're giving for every territory in the region, some information about their situation and what could happen in the future. And so 2 years later, we went back to the territory and to see how they use the indicators. And they said, okay, it's very useful to have them, but it's too difficult to find relevant information for my territory. So, okay, I have access to the global reports I was talking about. I have access to the the main indicators and to the definition, but when I'm trying to apply this information to my territory, I have some trouble and I don't know how I can make the link between like those global information and my territory. So we created like a territory specific analysis report on the indicators, and we published them and we automated them. So to this day, we still have those reports that gather many indicators, but for each territory. I might be able to show you that. So if I go to the regional observatory, each territory, sorry, it's in French, but you have a map of the region, and so each territory can click on itself, and they will have access to what is called a profile. And if you look at the profile, you see it's a very long PDF page, and so each territory has information about the methodology, about what happened compared to the previous year publication. And then you will have like indicators about air quality, GHG emissions, and then energy consumption, energy production. And then finally, what I was talking about, the climate related indicators. So here you have information about like what I was just showing to you, the idea that you have like a global report that is based on the kind of territory your territory is. For example, here you have information about this territory. I don't remember which one I took, but which is based on climate station, measure station. And so the link is made between the precise situation of this territory I'm looking at and this climate evolution trends that are in somewhere else. So yes, just so you have an illustration of what these projects led to. So globally, we think that it has been a great success to make these reports. And as you saw, we added many more indicators. And one of the main lessons of this project is the fact that we needed to listen to the territories, because we applied our good methodology, and then at the end we noticed that it was not enough to apply a great methodology that produced like scientific relevant and precise scientific indicators. We also need to be sure that we communicate those indicators well, and thus the creation of the reports. So that was the first example in our region. I hope it was illustrative and clear to you. I also have a more concrete example. In our region a few months ago, we created a mobility-related working group, because when you look at mobility, you see that there are many data that are available for mobility, like electric vehicle charging points, roads, the flows of public transport and the use of public transport, maybe the highways and the use of the highways entry and exits. So you have many data, but what are the needs from the territories? And so we asked a panel of our partners in Auvergne region. And so the main key point that was worrying a little bit the territories was the accessibility to services and jobs. So how people on their territories can have access to services, public services, schools, and of course jobs. So we did work in a project called Résilitaire to compute some indicators that would provide some like summary about the accessibility. And we discussed it with territories to see how they feel about like the very summed up indicators. So you have one indicator that gives some accessibility to services information, and one giving access to information about the accessibility to jobs. And it was still not enough. So what appeared on we still have the working group on mobility. It's still a meeting to this day. So we still have discussions about how to improve the indicators and their communication. And for example, one element that was really interesting for territories, what was this simulator. So the idea is, sorry, it's in French once again, but the idea is very simple. You have on the left like some actions that you can apply. So for example, the first one is reduce people who have a job who needs to move, for example, by distance work, or maybe by having like a closer job or something like that. On the right, you have the impacts on energy, GHG emissions, and the cost. And so you can just like move the small lever here, and you can see the impact. So of course it's very simplified, but it helps the territories to identify what are the main actions that they could apply. Is it by providing more public transport? Is it by helping companies locate near to the centers or near to public transport? Is it to provide new services? Is it to create new places throughout the city to give land, or no, it's not land, to give surface for companies or services. So you have services and companies throughout the whole city. So it can be useful for them to have like a better idea of what they could do to improve the situation. Okay, so just to conclude this, so you saw that we have some kind of three main lessons that we learned throughout the years and that we wanted to share with you. So first is to find the most inspiring partners, so the people that could provide you some data that could help you define and build the indicators, that could give you some feedbacks about how they feel compared to their expertise. So that's the first point, to identify the most inspiring partners. Second, it's important to find the right databases or the right data sources. So either you are willing to pay or not, either you want to be able to have raw data that you can process in your own, with your own tools on your own hypothesis, or if you want to have something that is already processed, and then you need a good methodology. You will need some information about how these data were processed. So that's the second point. And finally, oh, do you have a question? No. And finally, so the last point is to be able to identify the end user and who will be like the most passionate to be able to interact with you and to answer your questions and to make maybe some proposition about how to develop and how to enhance what you just did. So yeah, that's the most important lessons for us about this, the first part of identifying the end users, the stakeholders, and preparing the context of your data visualization, data manipulation, etc.